I'm Robert Doyle, and on behalf of the Streatham Society Committee, I would like to welcome you to tonight's meeting. Just a few bits of housekeeping, given that we have got quite a large audience. First of all, despite our best efforts, and it's rather disappointing given it's a cinematic evening, the images are not going to be as large as we'd like, so if anybody is at the very back and would like to come forward to get a better view, please do so. Get cosy and meet some new friends on the front rows. Secondly, we don't anticipate a fire, but in the event of fire, either exit through the main entrance to the church to the tower, or there are also exits at the sides of the church which are marked with green arrows. I hope we never have to make use of that information. I know my glamorous assistant will do the directions. I'll make some further announcements about forthcoming events at the interval. Just to say, we have got displays on other elements of cinematic history going up at the moment, which will be there to view during the interval. We'll also have some magic lantern slides as an additional surprise appearance as part of the history of photography and cinematography. So they'll be there to look at very carefully because they are very fragile. So that's another treat for the break. At the break, we will also have light refreshments, and the bar will also be open. The format is that Richard, our speaker, will talk for about 45 minutes. We'll then have about 20-25 minutes, no more, for the break, and then Richard will be able to answer your questions after the break. So, without further ado, let me attempt to get back to my page to actually introduce Richard, our speaker. Sorry about this. We're not having a great evening with the technology. Sorry about this. Sorry. No, I know who Richard Gray is. I'm just trying to give you the spiel. Sorry about this. That's perfectly all right. Sorry about this. So Richard Gray used to work as an information officer for then English Heritage, but he's now become best known as a historian of cinemas. He's produced several very well-regarded books, and he's also now the senior caseworker for the Cinema Theatre Association. At the end of this month, he's also got a new, much anticipated book coming out, which is going to be a co-production by the University of Liverpool Press and what's now Historic England's research division, which I think is called Palaces of Cinema, is that? The Cinema Palace. Right. So we're very grateful to Richard to come here this evening and to share his knowledge of the history of cinema with a focus on what we've gained and lost in Streatham over the years, from Magic Lantern to Mutiplex. So can you show your appreciation for our speaker tonight, Richard?
Can you hear? Oh, that seems to work, doesn't it? That's a little bit better. Right, thank you all over again. It's amazing to be standing in this church because my earliest days were in Glen Eldon Road, which is just over there. And we moved from Glen Eldon Road to Croydon in 1900 and frozen to death. And well, my parents weren't churchgoers, so we didn't. I never remember coming in here. And of course, there was this terrible, devastating fire, which I believe was about 20 years ago or so. So, you know, it probably looks very different from what it did then. But I remember going past this church, and I used to. The first school I went to was the one near Emmanuel Church, which is. There's just the tower left, I think, of it, which is further down Streatham High Road, going towards Norbury. And then I transferred to the St. Leonard's Church School, which was just there. Anyway, enough of me. So I'll say something about the Cinema Theatre Association. We've got several members here, which is good to see. And the CTA started a long time ago when cinema started to disappear, or at least stop showing films. It was started by a Daily Telegraph journalist. And he was concerned, you know, they were rather remarkable buildings, and nobody was doing any kind of recording of them because they were beginning to close and disappear. It's gone on from there, and we have an archive. We do visits, some abroad. I organised one to Portugal last year, and we started what's known as the casework function, which is to try and get them listed and get them preserved and then try. It's very difficult for them to go on being cinemas. That is very, very difficult indeed, because if an owner wants to to close it down, turn them into something else, and I mean years ago a lot of them became bingo clubs. So it's difficult from that point of view, but we can do something about preserving the buildings, and very occasionally they do come back to life, as has happened not too far away in Upper Norwood, Crystal Palace, what is now the Everyman Cinema, somebody nodding here, and it was originally a old-time cinema, 1928, the Rialto. Then it went through bingo, then it was bought by a church, and then they never got their change of use order, which you have to do, and it's very successfully become a revived cinema. Anyway, that's about the Cinema Theatre Association, and there's some leaflets which are on that table at the back on your right-hand side. Anyway, so this is going to be a terrible manipulation of things, because I've moved away from the lectern, and so I've got to hold the mic and turn the pages at the same time. Anyway, title slide, and also change the slides. Yes, magic lantern to somebody coming to help me. Yes, if you could do that, I think, because otherwise I'd need about 4 hands, not 2. So magic lantern to Mutiplex, which the Streatham Society has had this talk before. It's absolutely amazing that you can put up with it again, and such a big audience. I mean, we've got 80 people here or something like that, and some of the talks I do are for a handful of people, but this is for lots of people, so it's very, very gratifying indeed. And but what I do with this, it is the story of, well, not exactly film, but the beginning of film, the building type. Meaning cinemas, but so it starts with magic lanterns, which are Victorian things, and it ends up with the modern day multiplex. But and so there are examples all over not all over the country, but certainly in London and various different places. But I also localise it, so don't worry. There will be lots of Streatham examples and nearby places such as Brixton and Norbury. Anyway, so that's the first one. And next slide, please. First, precursors to film, it says here. And this is the zoetrope, which is a Victorian child's toy, really. And I mean, I'm sure you must be familiar with these things, whereby the boy jumps into the tub barrel, and you twizzle it round, and it looks like it's happening when it's various. It's in fact just a series of still images. What it did, though, is it exploited the eye's persistence of the retinal image. The signal transmitted to the brain perceives a series of images when rapidly shown as a single moving image. Next. A 19th century magic lantern show, as it says on the tin. Painted slides, and then later came to include photographs. And this has a biunial lens to create a dissolving effect. Next. And another precursor, the diorama in the towards the end of the 19th century, which was in Regent's Park, Park Square East in Regent's Park, and louvers, which you could just about see in the ceiling here, let in light to illuminate the painted landscape scenes. It was invented by the French inventor Louis Daguerre, one of the pioneers of photography, and they were known as daguerreotypes, as I'm sure you know. Now, if I can just point out that these slides are all too wide. They're supposed to be less cinematic, cinemascope shape, but with technical problems beyond my control. So they're all a bit wide, which doesn't look too bad with this one, but some of the buildings that we see a little bit later might look slightly peculiar. Next slide, please. And this is Edward Muybridge, who was an American experimenter with the rapid action camera. And what he was most interested in, I think, this was towards the end of the 19th century, what was happening with the horse's legs. And as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, the horse's legs in galloping along. Perhaps we don't need all these lights, really. How marvellous. Because otherwise we've still got a bit of light outside. So as you can see, the horse's legs do actually completely take off from the ground. Next. Various inventors were involved in the early days of the moving image. Thomas Edison, who you've got here, or rather his collaborator, William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, perfected a system whereby each image would be shown individually but in rapid succession, which is the principle of the moving picture. Next. And they came up with the kinetoscope parlor. The first one was in Chicago in early 1894. The second one was on Broadway in New York in April of the same year. And the first London example was in Oxford Street in October of the same year. The machines each one cost $300, but the parlors could earn $1,000 a day, so they were very successful. Next. The Streatham Town Hall. Mysterious building, this really. Patrick Luby, sorry, I'll have to stop. Can we do something about the lights, do you think? Anyway, going back to this, Patrick Luby, in Cinemas and Theatres of Wandsworth and Battersea, mentions a demonstration of the kinetoscope in February 1896 for the Streatham Photographic Society in what was variously known as the Streatham Town Hall, not a municipal building or assembly rooms, or sometimes known as Grand Theatre at number 344 Streatham High Road. And it ran through, I think, to Glen Eagle Road at the back. It was built in 1887 and later demolished. I've just, before coming here and starting, took a walk down. And the building's not there, it's been demolished. And I had a date of 1988 that it was demolished. And looking at the new building, which is on the ground floor, a tattoo parlor of some description, And it does look now about, well, that makes it 38 years ago, and it does look as though it's a building of that kind of date, so I can believe it. My young days here, I don't remember this thing at all, and I don't remember anybody talking about it. Sorry? The assembly hall part had gone. That was at the back. Yes, I walked round the back into Glen Eagle Road, if there is Glen Eagle Road, and I could, it's just sort of like a car park for the block of flats. So anyway, the whole thing's gone, but we know where it is. Anyway, that's it being demolished. So, next. This is the Lumiere brothers, photographic plate makers from Lyon, and they invented the cinematograph with an E. They took the principle of the kinetoscope, but they projected it onto a screen in a theatrical environment. That's the sort of most important part of it, really. Next. And the early Lumiere films were anything that moved, like the family home movies here, or taking videos with a camera or phone today. This is Al Goose with his wife and baby. The train, the most famous thing that the Lumieres filmed at a station of a place in the south of France called La Ciotat, which is where the Lumieres, the father, Antoine, had built a villa. So this was something else that moved. So they filmed it, and it was very dramatic because the train came into the station. It's only a few seconds long. Stopped at the station. The people got out. End of film. But well, I'm sure you all know it because it does get shown from time to time. If anybody's doing any kind of TV program about the history of film, this is one of the main things which is shown. Of course, it's said to have had a great effect in its day because nobody had ever seen a train and not on a railway line suddenly on the screen, and they were really rather terrified of it. Next. It's difficult to see this, but this is an inscription on the outside of a cafe in Paris near the Opera, and it commemorates the showing of the Lumiere's cinematograph in the Indian room in this cafe on the 28th of December 1895. The cafe, or rather the room, it was called the Indian Room, could accommodate 35 people, and they charged £1 each. It was by invitation, I understand, and 33 people attended. £1, I think, was probably quite a lot then, really. Next. Then it moved to London. This is the old Regent Street Polytechnic building in the upper half of Regent Street, just down from the BBC. It's now part of the University of Westminster, and it's the old exterior of the building before Regent Street was redeveloped in the early part of the 20th century. The Lumiere films were presented by a collaborator called Felicien Truy, and they used a hall at the back, and which you can see, it was difficult to see really, it was such a long way away, but it does say on the left-hand side, the first block, if you see, like a shop front, it does say cinematograph there with E on the end of the word. And the operative date was the 20th of February, 1896. Next. A Victorian engraving of the cinematograph equipment. There it is with the man turning the handle. At that time, the projector was also the camera at the same time. All you had to do was to get a magic lantern behind, which you've got there, the sort of lamp house with the light inside it, which would be like a limelight. Which could be used. And this was before they'd thought of spools, and so the film was just sort of falling on the ground. Next. This is the front of the old Empire Theatre in Leicester Square. They took the cinematograph equipment from just a few. It was enormously successful at the Polytechnic in Regent Street, and they took the system from the beginning of March, just a few weeks later. It's difficult for you to see because we've got the light problem, but over the entrance it does say cinematograph again with E, and what they rather cleverly did was to film people going into the theatre, develop the films, and then show them later so that people would have the novelty of seeing themselves on film for the very first time. There were also two English inventors, Bert Akers and Robert Paul. Initially they collaborated, but eventually they fell out and worked on their own. Akers' films were screened in Finsbury, just north of the city, on the same day as the Lumiere's presentation, but it was not a public event, with the result that the Lumiere show takes the credit for the birth of film exhibition. The new medium was immediately exploited by entrepreneurial itinerant showmen, magic lantern shows, previously presenters of magic lantern shows, who would travel the country setting up animated picture shows with a diversity of buildings converted temporarily for the purpose. Next. And in country towns, such as in Beverley in Yorkshire, corn exchanges such as this one became temporarily used as cinemas, and this actually here, film took root, and the Corn Exchange became the Picture Playhouse for quite some time. The building is still there, and I think it's listed, but it's long since ceased to be a cinema. Next. Churches were amazingly pressed into use, and this was a church in Tolmer Square near Euston Station. It looks like the bottom of a church, doesn't it, with the buttresses either side. What it's lost the rest of the tower and the spire, but the body of the church I think was rather similar to this one, or certainly of this sort of era. This church dates from about 1830 odd, I think. I think the Tolmer was rather the same thing. And again, it became a full-time cinema eventually. And public halls next, please, such as, again, at the Streatham Hall, assembly rooms in Streatham High Road, which I've already mentioned. And Patrick Luby mentions another moving picture system, the Heinz this is difficult to say, Folymograph, demonstrated to the Streatham Photographic Society on the 18th of May 1897 at the Beehive Assembly Rooms at 496 Streatham High Road, off the High Road between what remains of the Emmanuel Church and in the enormous Sainsbury's, which is, I think, beyond the white painted pub you see on the left-hand side. Very nice building, that. The Beehive Hall, I remember, oh dear, personal reminiscence, going in there to see, I don't know, some sort of educational, instructive films when I was at that little school, which I think has probably disappeared, which is behind the sort of car park area. Beyond it was the Glue Works, PB Cow & Co. Next. Another example of an early cinema conversion, the Mitcham Lane Picture Palace at 127 Mitcham Lane on the corner of Blegborough Road. I didn't have time to go and look at whether any of this still exists. I mean, this is a drawing, an architectural drawing for what it was supposed to look like, and then a poster for it. So whether there's anything left or not, I really don't know, but it was quite some way down Mitcham Lane going towards Tooting. It was operated from 1909 by a local businessman called James Harding. It was renamed Picturedrome in the late 1920s, But by 1930, takings were being hit by new cinemas opening, such as the Astoria, which became the Odeon up there, and survival depended on children's matinees. A new owner, one Samuel Kropp, with a K, installed sound film equipment in 1930 on hire purchase, but takings were still poor, and in the following year he faced bankruptcy and the cinema closed in 1931. Next, another building type which turned into cinemas. There was an early 20th century phase for roller skating. And this one, which was called the Kursaal and then the Dome in Worthing, which was opened originally as a skating rink, didn't last all that long. By 1911, it had become a cinema. And it faces the promenade at Worthing. Next, and this is the inside. When you switch from roller skating to cinema, you didn't have to do a lot, because all you had to do was to put a screen at one end, which is where the proscenium is at the far end with the curtains, and instead of having a flat floor to roll around on, you put in a raked one with seats, and then you've got the seating on this sort of sitting out area, but all you had to do was to twiddle round the seats to face the screen, and you were in business. Next. What often happened in these early conversions were conversions from shops. This was the Nelson Electric Theatre in Old Kent Road, which was an early shop conversion. And you paid your money on the corner, and then you went in where you can see immediately to the right, you can see a man emerging there. And so you went in and out there, so it was all rather sort of rudimentary, really. This poor thing, it was never converted for sound, and it closed in 1931. A huge Astoria cinema had just opened then, and these very early conversions simply couldn't compete. Particularly if they were very small and poverty-stricken, they could never afford the sound equipment, and they simply closed down. The building's still there. I've been past it. Patrick Luby mentions a short-lived shop conversion at 172 Streatham High Road, existing between 1913 and 1915. I haven't got a photograph of it, unfortunately, but I've just had a look, and there's a small Sainsbury's, which is opposite the present-day Odeon pretty well. So it was there. I had a walk round the back, and it looks like what you very often got with these shop conversions was a bit of an extension at the back, because they wouldn't be deep enough for an auditorium. They were very often just one shop unit wide, but they needed to be deeper, so you've got an extension, and there's a little sort of alleyway around the back, and it's possibly still there. This is all archaeology, of course. Other early shop conversions which I'm afraid I can't illustrate. The Picture Theatre of 1910-11, operated by a firm named Brickwells Limited, and we don't even know where that was. And another one, which is unidentifiable, or rather its location is, the Streatham Hill Theatre, so it must have been somewhere near Streatham Hill Station, operated by a firm called New Skating Palaces and Bioscope Theatre Company. So, what were these interiors like next? Now, this is going to be completely hopeless, because it's a very, very dark slide in the first place, because it's a very dark slide, because it's a very dark painting. And it's a painting by somebody called Malcolm Drummond. It's called In the Cinema of 1915, and it's in the Ferrens Art Gallery in Hull, and it's a dreadful image, and you can't see a damn thing. and all you can see is the projection beam overhead, and you can see people, but if you could see it, because we've got this light problem, then you'd see that people are sort of bunched up together, and very, very tight seating with caps on. Next slide, please. Variety theatres included film in their programmes, many eventually becoming full-time cinemas. This one didn't. It was the Brixton Theatre, which stood between what is now the Ritzy Cinema in Brixton and the Public Library, which was destroyed by a bomb during the Second World War. Next. And then nearby, which did become a permanent cinema, the Empress Theatre in Brighton Terrace, Brixton, just off Brixton Road, nearly opposite the tube station, and that ended up as a Granada cinema until it was demolished. Next. The fairground. Fairs were often the first exposure the public had of the moving image. Showmen would film in a location in advance of the fair's arrival and the resulting novelty of people seeing themselves on film a few days later. This is actually on Hampstead Heath, Queen's Cinematograph. But fairground style, the fairground or style of frontage for fairgrounds influenced the very early cinema facades when they first started being built. This is Pike's and Finsbury Park Cinematograph Theatre, which opened in 1909, with its sort of fairground influenced frontage. This frontage is still there behind a hoarding, amazingly. But the fairground did a film a disservice by taking it down from its scientific and cultural beginnings to that of a crude sideshow. Next. Early purpose-built cinemas in London, including this one, too wide, as I say here, the King's Hall in High Street, Tooting. The earliest purpose-built cinema in London, which opened on the 30th of January 1909. An unusually large cinema for this early date. The local paper, the Tooting and Balham Gazette, reported that it could hold an audience of 1,200, although the London County Council's Theatre Committee gave permission for only 562 seats. Operators often exaggerated the size of their cinemas anyway, because it looked good on publicity. And it was described that it was the first hall in London designed and built for the exhibition of animated pictures. Patrick Luby, who I quote a lot, claimed it to be the first purpose-built cinema in Britain. That said, we tried to get that listed some years ago. Where it was is, if you're starting from Tooting Broadway Station, going south towards, what's the next station down? Collier's Wood, isn't it? It was down there a bit, not far. It was on the left-hand side. I have to go and have a look at that. There's a plaque, I understand. It ended up as a showroom for Mercedes cars. Although it was very early, it lost its original front. There was never much anyway, really, if you could look at a glorified shed. So Historic England wouldn't list it. It was rather a shame. Historically. Next. This is an advert for it when it was the King's Hall. Yes, King's Hall, 1911. Next. This is the circumstances of showing films in the early days, with the projectionist and projector in with the audience. And you see there's no division between the two, and well, it's difficult to see in this slide, but above the projector on the left-hand side, right up in the top left-hand corner, there's like an old-fashioned loo system because there were some terrible fires. The early days of film used what was known as nitrate-based film stock, which meant it was highly inflammable. And if it got caught in what's known as the gate in the projector, it could literally explode. And there were some terrible accidents, and therefore something had to be done as far as government legislation to try and control the operation of cinemas. There were some, the worst aspect of these disasters was not so much people being sort of actually burnt, but escape. One of the worst cases was an upstairs cinema, I think in Barnsley, and it was full of children. There were 60 or 80 of them, and then there was one of these terrible fires, and they all tried to get out and down the stairs, and a lot of them perished as a result, so something had to happen. Therefore, the government brought in the Cinematograph Act, which became operative at the beginning of January 1910. In central locations, the size and opulence of cinemas increased, all very much influenced by theatres of the period. Classical architectural embellishments, padded seats, elaborate light fittings, etc. And then next, an example of an early purpose-built cinema, the Empire Picture Palace at 225 Streatham High Road, opened on the 12th of December 1910. It was just before, if you could swivel the camera to the right, there would be Streatham Station. Large for its date, the London County Council approved plans allowing for nearly 1,000 seats with space for 90 standing, although press reports mentioned 1,200 seats. The South London Press reported that the 100-foot by 58-foot auditorium had an ornate ceiling painted in buff and grey with panelled walls topped by an enriched cornice, and it also had luxurious plush red tip-up seats. The screen measured 24 feet by 19 feet, and there was a lounge which had several pleasing and attractive bronze statuettes in the report, and there was a well-equipped refreshment room, 47 feet long, and there was also a reading and smoking room, so it was quite a little complex. The Empire closed in 1932, being unable to compete with the recently opened and better located Astoria, now Odeon, and Gaumont Palace cinemas further up Streatham High Road. Becoming a food storage depot during World War II, it was destroyed by a flying bomb in June 1944. Later, the front became a post office, and it's now, what is it, a bar of some sort with the auditorium used as a snooker club. I think that's probably out-of-date information. Next. Another reasonably local one, what was originally the Central Hall Picture Palace in Upper Tooting Road, Tooting, near Tooting Beck Tube Station, opened in 1910, later became a classic cinema running repertory programmes. Next, it's difficult to see here, on the right-hand side, the Norbury Public Hall at 1355 London Road, Norbury, also known as the King Edward Hall, opened in 1906 and was operated as a cinema in 1909, or as from 1909, with seating for 700. In 1910, it became the Palais de Luxe with another name change in 1920, but with more seats, 859. It seems not to have been a great success, with frequent periods of closure and changes of operator. For a few months in 1935, it was known as the Searchlight. The final blow came with the opening of a new cinema almost opposite, the Rex, and it closed for good in 1937. During World War II, it ran as a communal British restaurant. Did actually look up what they are. Later, a paint warehouse, a supermarket, and a bedding store, but it was demolished in 2022. British restaurants were, if you got bombed out in the Second World War, hadn't got a kitchen, you went there. Next, Pike's Cinematograph Theatre in Brixton Hill, which the front is still there, I think. Opened in March 1911. And it was one of Pike's early circuit, possibly the first cinema circuit. Amazingly, by 1914, there were 104 cinema circuits in Britain, not just cinemas, circuits. This closed in 1957, and most of the auditorium was demolished. Next, the Electric Pavilion in Brixton, now the Ritzy, which opened in 1911 for the Israel Davis circuit, became part of the classic circuit and then became rather run down. It came close to being lost in the 1970s, but reopened as the Little Bit Ritzy in 1978. And next is the auditorium, which is complete. At the moment, I think there's a screen in front of the original proscenium, which is rather a shame. But otherwise, it's a pretty well complete Edwardian cinema interior with nice decorative detail both on the walls and on the ceiling and on the proscenium itself. And it's listed. Next. And that's what it looks like today. In 1995, it was extended on the site of the destroyed Brixton Theatre, adding more screens and a cafe. Next. The Streatham Picture Theatre at 130 Streatham High Road, opening in 1912, and became the Golden Domes from circa 1915. The foyer had a fountain with coloured lights, so it was quite a sort of smart building. 1913, it started opening on Sundays, but local churches objected. Next, there's an ad from 1934. And a bit of my personal connections here. This will bore poor Robert over there terribly because he's heard it all before. My mother was nearly born in the cinema in 1914, and then later in 1933, her sister, my Aunt Joy, with her friend Rita Lupino, sister of the actress Ida Lupino, the first Golden Age Hollywood female film director, and Rita and my aunt, wearing Ida's clothes to look more grown up, managed to get in to see the horror-rated King Kong. My aunt was apparently terrified of the big ape climbing up the Empire State Building. End of personal recollection. In 1935, the Golden Domes was acquired by Associated British Circuit and closed in 1938, 2 days before the opening of the company's new and much larger Regal cinema on the opposite side of Streatham High Road towards Streatham Hill Station. The Golden Domes was left empty through World War II, and the frontage eventually was taken down, and it became a furniture showroom. Next. The Palladium, Brixton Hill, next to Lambeth Town Hall, opening in 1913. And we have an architect for this, Gilbert Booth, who did quite a lot. And of course, with purpose-built cinemas, you then started to get the plans had to go before the local planning committee. And they had to do that in order to get a license to be built, because they had to comply to the regulations of the 1910 Cinematograph Act. so we know the architect of this. It was one of 9 cinemas to open in Brixton between 1910 and 1915. The cornice on it absolutely echoed the town hall. You can just see the edge of the town hall on the right-hand side. I suppose the town hall was built around about the same time. Pretty nice building, I think, originally. I mean, that frontage has long since disappeared. Next. Elaborate Edwardian-style plasterwork inside the Palladium in Brixton, but much of it lost some years ago in a fire. Cinema interiors began imitating live theatres in order to go upmarket and attract a better clientele with increased admission charges. Next. It was taken over by Associated British, and the façade dates from the mid-50s. I don't know that it was necessarily damaged in the Second World War. They just decided to have a new look. It became a club called The Fridge, and I'm not quite sure whether it's still that now or not. It is. I'm sure you go there all the time. Next. The scale of cinemas just before the First World War became larger, and the largest cinema built before the First War was the Grange in Kilburn High Road, with over 2,000 seats, opening in 1914. And again, we have an architect for that, and that one is listed Grade 2. And I think at that point, that gives quite a good point for me to stop and for everybody to have a glass of wine or a cup of tea, which is I'm going to have the former rather than the latter. And thank you very much so far. Right, yes. Long way to go because we've only got to 1905. This is Hollywood in 1905, which looks like a village. Next. But, what was it? 11 years later, they were making films like Intolerance, 1916, which, here's one of the sets from it, sent a clear signal for architectural megalomania. During World War I, the American film industry pulled ahead while Europe was otherwise preoccupied. The USA only entered the war in 1917. One reason for the huge success of film in America was the fact that 1 million immigrants a year were entering the country at the time, many of them speaking little or no English, therefore making silent movies readily accessible and popular. As a result, American cinemas became larger and larger and more lavish, such as, next, bit dark this one, the Roxy in New York of 1927. Here's a poster for it. Next, a poster for it, which tells you all about it. The main thing is that it cost $10 million. Meanwhile, in Britain, from 1916, with the introduction of building controls in that year, cinema construction ceased. But after 1918, building resumed. American influence increased the scale of cinemas. Next. Such as the Pavilion in Shepherd's Bush of 1923, the largest in London, possibly in Britain at the time, and one of the first cinemas to be treated as serious architecture. The architect, Frank Verity, designed it in the spirit in which he considered the Romans would have brought to the problem of the super cinema had they happened upon it. Listed Grade 2. It's now a hotel, hasn't been a cinema in a long time. Next, Auditorium, long since disappeared. Next, and biggest of all, it's the back of Green's Playhouse in Glasgow, the largest cinema built in this country, with 4,200 seats, a gigantic thing. Terrible sort of messy building, but very grandiose and spectacular, simply because of its size. During the 1930s, apart from the USA, Hollywood made greater profits from British film exhibition than from any other country. Well, we did speak vaguely the same language. 60% of audiences were female, the movie close-up, impossible on stage, becoming a defining aspect of film. Female film stars demonstrated to women how to dress and how to appear in general. Next. And so we've got Hollywood in the West End, the American influence in style and opulence, such as the front of the Empire in Leicester Square, photograph dating from 1959 with Ben-Hur on. Next, and you went in and there was the grand foyer, you went up the stairs next, and you went through this almost like a drawing room on the first floor, and then you continued on and next to the auditorium. Next, and more locally, the Streatham Hill Theatre, the last theatre designed by William Sprague, responsible for a number of theatres in the West End. Always primarily a live venue, it is thought to have had held limited screenings on Sundays during the late 1930s when live performances were prohibited. Between 1962 and 2019, it operated as a bingo club, but was subsequently bought by a charismatic church. Next. What I'm terming the exotics and American import cinemas as part of the escapist film-going experience. It found an appropriate architectural and decorative style for cinemas, something that conveyed entertainment to the passing masses and those who entered, which in those days was nearly everyone. And you got the atmospheric interior, which gave an impression of sitting outdoors, surrounded by picturesque Mediterranean buildings under a starry sky, and most notably, relatively locally, the Astoria in Brixton of 1929, and here's the auditorium. It seated just under 3,000. Projectors in the ceiling simulated scudding clouds and brilliant sunshine for day before the film started, and soft moonlight and twinkling stars for night after the film had begun. It was one of 4 huge cinemas built in London and all named Astoria, the others being in Streatham, later the Odeon, Finsbury Park and Bermondsey. At Brixton on opening day next, the queues started forming at 8:30 in the morning, and by noon, 2 queues entirely surrounded the building, which, if you know that, is pretty vast. The opening attraction was the early talkie, The Singing Fool. Next. No, go back, can you? There we are, yes. The opening film was Singing Fool plus variety, including a famous opera singer, Heddle Nash, and a recital on the cinema organ. The last 40 minutes of the variety show were broadcast. Celebrities attending included Alfred Hitchcock and the silent film star Paula Negri. 175,000 people were admitted in the first month. Astoria cinemas were acquired by the British arm of Paramount in 1931 and then passing to Odeon in 1940. Next, the Brixton Astoria closes cinema in 1972 and eventually became the Academy Rock venue, which is what you see it as here. It's Grade 2 star listed. Next, but it was mainly what the exhibitor thought might sell tickets, so you could have Chinese, as in Southall here. Next, Moorish, as in Walthamstow, Granada. Next, or Oldie Englishy, such as the Gaumont Palace in Salisbury. Next, or you could have Art Deco, as in the Regal Uxbridge. Next. Or even Cubist in Edmonton, or Gothic. Next, yes, sorry, keep that one, which is the Tooting Granada, is not very far away. I could say miles about the Tooting Granada, but we haven't really got time, and you can all go and see it because it's open for the open house day. You don't have to play bingo. You can go on the open house day in September every year. It's this country's only Grade 1 listed cinema. It's truly remarkable. But next, Egyptian, this one, Carlton Upton Park. Next, Egyptian again, a part of the interior, the murals on the wall of the Astoria in Streatham, Egyptian-style murals. Next, and there's the Astoria Auditorium. Next, opening day of the front of the Astoria. Opened in June 1930 to seat 2,600 with the film Paris, starring the musical star Jack Buchanan. It featured cine variety in which a stage show would be incorporated into the program. Next, it's difficult to see that, but the film Paris is up there, sort of difficult to see really, on the left-hand side. Then the rest of it seemed to be the live part of it, which is called the Astoria Ensemble. Next, as it pretty well looks now, taken over by Odeon in 1940. Post-World War II, the stage was occasionally used for touring ballet companies, pantomimes at Christmas, and music performances. Renamed Odeon in 1961, in 1979 subdivided into smaller units, and now has 8 screens. As far as I'm concerned, that is a building which should be listed, and we will do this at some point. It's a very good building. Next. The front of this is still there. What I've named Town Hall Municipal exterior in the form of the Gaumont Palace at Streatham Hill of 1932. Next. And internally, it was originally known in a style which has become known as the Swedish grey style of attenuated columns and tall, thin sculptures. The interior was destroyed by bombing in the Second World War and not reinstated for the reopening in 1955. But it only lasted 6 years to close in 1961 for conversion into a 10-pin bowling centre, an import from the USA. It has now been redeveloped for residential accommodation with the frontage retained. The introduction of sound films coincided with the desire for a new image for cinemas, and architects looked to continental modernism for inspiration, especially Germany. And this is a poster for The Jazz Singer, the first partly talkie film. Next, inspiration, architectural inspiration. The Universum Cinema in Berlin of 1928. Next. Another one in Berlin, the Titania Palace. Next. The Odeon circuit was established by Oscar Deutsch, who you see here. Next. And towers were the thing with the Odeons. A lot of them. The original Odeons. This is one in Chingford, sadly no longer with us. Next. And this one's also sadly no longer with us, in Colwyn Bay in North Wales. Next. But the Sutton Coldfield Odeon in Birmingham is still with us and is listed. The Odeon circuit brought modernism to the British High Street with the distinctive tower and fin catching the eye in an urban location. Next, and culminating in the dramatic outline of the Odeon Leicester Square. Next, Odeon also influenced the design of cinemas by other operators, including the rival associated British circuit, as can be seen in the frontage of the Regal near Streatham Hill Station. Opened in 1938, 2 days after, as previously mentioned, the nearby Golden Domes closed, run by the same company. Next, the triple height foyer Got that one listed as well. Next, and the original auditorium closed in 2000, as by that year the cinema and the Odeon were under the same ownership, and it was decided to concentrate efforts on the latter. The auditorium has been replaced by flats, but the foyer survives and is listed, as I said. Next, the Rex in Norbury, London Road, Norbury, the exterior. Shot opening in January 1937 with the famous Fred and Ginger film Swing Time. The architect was one Douglas Harrington, son of the promoter, although the cinema was run throughout its life by Associated British, closed in 1962, and after experimenting with bingo, was demolished. But enough of architecture. Next, what did the technology of projecting films look like at the time? And here we have a bank of film projectors with slide projectors at each end. The spools of film lasted 20 minutes, followed by a changeover to the next machine, which would already be running. A spot at the top right-hand corner of the screen would warn the projectionist of the impending change, and they would also have to ensure the focus would be identical for each reel. It was a highly skilled job, but the process was eventually simplified by splicing together the spools of film to comprise an entire feature, if not the whole program, including ads and trailers. Programs then were more complex, with short subjects, a newsreel, and trailers. Some of the advertising would be specifically for local businesses. Next. There was a moratorium on cinema construction during World War II. This moratorium went on until 1955, by which time it was almost too late for the new mass appeal of television. The peak year for cinema admissions was 1946, when there were 1,600 million admissions in this country. Admissions sank to 54 million by 1984, before rising to 177 million by 2018. And of course, then there was the pandemic, and last year it was 123. Television broadcasting began by the BBC in 1936, which you see here. Next. And very successful it was too. But film fought back with wide screens and stereophonic sound. You can see the Cinerama screen, which was in the Casino Theatre, now Prince Edward, in Old Compton Street in London in 1954. But cinemas started closing for redevelopment. Here's Gloria Swanson, the silent film star, in the ruins of the Roxy in New York in 1960. Next, but some new cinemas were built, such as the Curzon in Mayfair of 1966, Britain's youngest listed cinema at grade 2. Next. But the ones that did survive were subdivided, and there was what was known as tripling, and this is a diagram of the Granada in Welling, of how it was split up inside. And I don't think I've got much time to sort of go into the detail of all that, so you just have to take it as what actually happened. Well, I mean, I suppose this has happened really to the Odeon in Streatham as well. Next. But then came the revolution, the multiplex revolution, an introduction from 1985. The first one introduced from the USA and was built in Milton Keynes. It was known as the Point, and while the building's still there, 1985 in Milton Keynes, the first multiplex. Next. This is a typical multiplex plan, which not only had got all these series of screens all round, but you only needed one projection room, which saved on the number of projectionists. Next, local multiplexes. Actually, there aren't any locally, as they initially required greenfield sites and then brown land, or were incorporated in a large redevelopment scheme. So you have to go to Croydon, as in this one, for the Warner, later the View on Purley Way. Next. Or the Cineworld in Wandsworth, Next, or to Wimbledon for the Odeon Multiplex included in the Centre Court shopping complex. And this is probably why the Streatham Odeon has survived. Next. So what do we do with all these old, redundant, often listed cinemas? Although occasionally traditional cinemas come back to life. As I previously said, the Everyman in Crystal Palace reopened in 2018. Next. And here's its auditorium with, on the far right-hand side, you can see some of the original 1928 decoration. Next. Also from 2018, the Streatham Space Project, with films presented on Sunday afternoons. But it's now closed, I believe, awaiting a new lessee. Next. But failing this, there is performance, such as here, the Apollo Hammersmith, originally a huge cine variety venue called the Gaumont Palace. Next. Or place of worship, the Gaumont Palace, now the Dominion Centre in Wood Green. Next. Or what I call cabaret cinema, with tables and armchairs enabling audiences to drink and eat while watching a film. And this is the Rex in Berkhamsted, 1938. I must admit there haven't been too many of them. I wish there were more, because it's a very good idea, because it kept the complete original auditorium. Very nice experience seeing films there. Next. Or the inevitable Wetherspoons pub. And this is in an ex-cinema in Ponders End in north-east London. So I think I've just about done the time slot thing. So next, I think that's the final one, says the end. So thank you very much indeed for your attention. And if there are any questions, and if we've got time for them, I'll try and answer.
Thank you very much, Richard. My apologies once again to everybody for the technical issues that we've had today, which really not appropriate given something which is all about the history of projector technology. So, is there anybody who'd like to ask a question?
Hello, yes, I have a question. Thank you very much, by the way. That was really, really interesting. I have a question about the Streatham Odeon, which I imagine there's other cinemas that have followed the same route. But does anyone know, when it was converted, how much, if anything, of the original architectural features inside are still there? Because when I go to films there, I get the feeling that they're sort of black boxes that have been inserted into this larger space. I'd be so fascinated to have someone show me around it and show anything backstage or that shows how that happened. I just wondered if anybody knows any more about that.
Use this. You're absolutely right. I think it went through, so I'll start again. In the 1960s, the Odeon company took a dislike to the Egyptian detailing. The murals and so on all got painted out and covered over with fabric. There is Talking Pictures repeat these Look at Life shorts, which were shown in films, and they were terribly proud, the Odeon company, of what they were doing to these. But it was like Barry Bucknell, if anybody could remember that name, of slaughtering these original interiors. And that happened in the 1960s, so a lot of the original detail disappeared at that time. But then subsequently, it got cut. There's usually two phases of this happening, in that there would be what I referred to as tripling, and what you had was the circle still there, or balcony rather, with everybody sitting there, and then they would subdivide the rear stalls part of it, but then it would get further cut up, and so it is like a series of black boxes. So if you want to, it's more archaeology. You've got open cupboard doors and things. I don't know whether it had a huge stage the Astoria there. So whether they put a screen on that or not, I don't know. There must also be the top of the flight. It's a damn great flight tower there. It must all be there. It's amazing. But we're doing it. Well, when it gets listed, when it gets put in for listing, we'll do a jolly good ferret around to see what's there. Yeah, absolutely.
Just to say,
and that would all come into the listing. You see,
if I can just interject, just say we are going to follow it up on our Facebook group. The former chief projectionist did say that his understanding is that the original fire curtain, because there was a variety stage which also had Egyptian painting on it, was also whitewashed out, but that is still actually hanging in the flies above. So I think there's quite a lot of investigation to be done to find out what the truth of that is.
You might be able to bring it down and rub off the white paint, and there would be that Egyptian fire curtain.
Hi, great talk. That was really interesting. What was the peak year for cinemas around here?
Nationally, 1946.
But what was the peak years for having the amount of cinemas? I remember seeing a cinema map which suggested that circa 1920 there were about 6 cinemas between here and Brixton. I mean, what was the peak year for actually having cinemas?
Yes, you're probably, because the earlier ones, there were more of the small earlier ones, and the earlier ones closed because they couldn't compete against the huge new ones. And Streatham had 3 very big cinemas, so I think by 1938 it would have you had to fill about 7,000 seats every night. It was simply colossal.
So my recollection is that I think about 1935 is in terms of the number of separate spaces, but actually the number of cinema seats increased because of the 3 super cinemas opening.
Yeah. You see, the Astoria, Odeon, originally seated over 2,000. The same thing with the one by Streatham Hill Station, the Gaumont Palace.
So going back to the very early days when entrepreneurs would take local film of people and then screen it for them when they came into those very early cinemas. Has any of this survived? Is it in the National Archives? Or because of the kind of social benefit and content of it rather than the, theatrical?
That's very interesting. The very early ones, yes. I mean, yes. I wish I could answer that.
Hoping to do a screening in Streatham Hill Theatre, the Ruach Church, during this film festival this year in September. So it's not dead certain yet, but it's hoped that there will be a screening in there again.
Oh, that would be marvellous. Marvellous.
I was quite surprised that you showed some very grand cinemas from as early a date as 1914. I mean, were there any sort of decent quality films as early as that? I don't know.
Yes, the feature film. This is a bit beyond my subject, really, but as soon as the feature film and films got longer, then the cinemas became bigger and more comfortable and so on. The 2 things sort of came together, really, particularly in America. Before the very early days, very early 1900s, then you had these very short films, and so that kind of thing suited a sort of shop front cinema, for lack of a better phrase, really. But then as soon as the feature film came along, then the cinemas got bigger with it.
I'm sorry to show off, but I used to be friendly with Benny Green, the jazz musician.
Yes, Benny Green, yes.
He came from the King's Cross area of London, and I often spoke to him about the Tolma, who you mentioned, the Tolma in Tolma Square, and he used to say, what a flea pit that was.
It was,
So when did the cinemas become flea pits?
you build a new cinema, the old cinema, and this is going back a long way, the old cinema then becomes rather dated and nobody wants to go to it. And then it shows, and then the distributor will show the best films, the newest films in the big new cinema, and the old cinema would get the leftovers, the crumbs off the table kind of thing. Benny Green, you're absolutely right. I think he was brought up in that area, and he had a memory of seeing films in the Paramount in Tottenham Court Road, which is now completely forgotten because it disappeared. But it was a huge cinema built in what seems like a completely improbable place. Well, he used to go with his family, I think, and they used to throw bits of, chicken legs to. Some of the family would be there, and some of the family, a chicken bone would go across, that kind of thing. But it made sense because it was at the point where the trolleybus system ended, the North London trolleybus system ended at the top of Tottenham Court Road. It's actually very interesting to mark out where cinemas were and transport, because there was not much in the way of private cars in there. So, these big cinemas were very often built at sort of junctions of tramway systems, or the new Victoria, now called Apollo Victoria, had the railway station one side and a tram the other side. So that all sort of made sense. Anyway, thanks for that.
I think we've exhausted our time, so can I just ask you all to show your appreciation again for Richard?